because G2, people will focus on the last series versus T1, and they did throw Thorin. I mean, there's not really another way to say this, especially like the game 3. You know, it was really questionable decision making, I think, from G2 around certain objectives, like Caps getting caught out on Tristana in the mid lane via, you know, the hook was pretty terrible. Especially when they could have like doubled back into Drake. You know, people look at Broken Blade's performance, like they, you know, they'll fault Broken Blade for blind picking the Jax, but basically what this tournament became by the later stages was a mind game in draft between like Jax and Twisted Fate. So if you basically, because teams started showing, if you pick Twisted Fate, okay, we're going to pick Jax into you, right? He's going to be able to dodge the pick a card using Counter-Strike, and then he'll all in the Twisted Fate, and so it becomes really hard. But the thing that G2, I think, didn't account for is that, you know, Zeus had only played, I think, one Rumble game this year, and he's not been, in terms of his career, he's actually played very few Rumble games overall. He played it last Worlds, and people saw that because it was, like, the most powerful pick in the meta. But I don't think they expected the Rumble into the Jax. Jax is a very shit matchup into Rumble. But frankly, like Broken Blade also played it badly. You know, he went back and like he got first blood because Zeus took a stupid tower shot and he was able to TP to the turret, catch the wave, and then get first blood in a solo kill on Zeus. But then what he did with that money was he turned it into a Phage instead of Merc treads. And so Zeus just bought Sork shoes and just ran him down repeatedly after that. But there were real advantages, I think, despite the shit matchup that Broken Blade had. Then we have Caps, who's like popping off. You have this poke composition with Ivern brushes, but instead we're just getting caught out by hooks and getting picked off when we should be turning back and like, you know, getting our soul or soul point on the Drake. And it was really, really, you know, advantageous at times to G2 in a very winnable game. But there were a lot of unforced errors that G2 made, and it just seemed like a lot of their players were individually off on the day. And, you know, at this level of competition, it becomes very, very difficult to recover from that. I mean, even game 2, they absolutely should have won. I mean,
that was a bag on that one.
Yeah, it's really wild. Like there was a world where after 3 games, G2 was up 2-1.
Like you even look at the comp they had in game 2; those are like champions they want, mate. Like you would think that should be the winnable game, yeah.
Yeah, especially because Faker was having a very bad game in game 2, and you have this massive Aurelion Soul on Caps. But again, we just make some unforced errors, and that, you know, that's kind of the end of it. And T1 is a very good team at playing from behind, but I agree with your point earlier, Thorin. This is probably the most vulnerable that we're going to see T1 for quite some time, especially because T1 arguably got better the longer the tournament went on. I mean, Keria started to actually play Nautilus again, which was a huge pick in this tournament that he was very not confident on earlier. So that was very important that he starts to like play more meta champs. And, you know, I think we see the difference between the T1 that won Worlds this last year and the T1 at MSI, which is when they are leading the meta, they look absolutely amazing. When they're playing catch up, they really struggle. Like if they don't have the champs in the pool, it is very hard. It takes a long time for them to get them back. Even champions that Keria has played to an extremely high level previously, like Nautilus, which is confusing.
This is why, though, I do think you have to credit that there is still a difference between elite Asian teams and even the very best of the West. Because between the 2 series, Monty, the 3-2 upper bracket one and then the 3-0 lower one for T1, right? Yeah, on paper, of those like 8 games, there might actually be like 7 games that like G2 could have won, but they only won 2. And there's a difference. Why? Because the difference is, even when T1's playing sloppy and bad and people, they can close the game out, mate. You've got to give props to that. Like, the actual ability to close the game out is that. By the way, if closing the game out was easy, BLG would be the fucking champions of this tournament. It's not easy, but anyone who can actually, like, still pull through games like that, I have respect for. Like, they still, like, they got through that. The difference is T1 survived the hard parts of the tournament and gave themselves a chance to still maybe be in the final. Didn't get there, but they give themselves a chance to at least.
Well, I think it's a lot of it is T1 just knows how to pull the trigger, right? Like G2, I think there was still a lot of second guessing of themselves, even like in game 3 when they had a comp that was pretty definitively outranged because Broken Blade fell so far behind, but Broken Blade was kind of irrelevant, you know, to the success of the composition at the end. And, you know, I also just I disagree with the way Broken Blade built early. I disagreed with the way that he built late in the game. Like, I think there was a way he probably could have transitioned into tank and just been a stun bot with Counter-Strike and actually been more useful in many senses in that final game of the series. But there wasn't really a clear win condition for T1. And G2 like refused to do Baron. They refused to like push the pace on objectives. Like, for example, they start baiting Baron and they don't force a TP and they basically just remove themselves from the objective. Like, they were never actually putting pressure on. T1 was able just to kind of like go back and farm out bot side again, and then they never had to like commit to the fight at Baron until later. And by the time they do, G2 has very bad positioning. Faker has an amazing wall. Zeus puts the equalizer in the like basically jams them into the back of the pit and then puts the equalizer there, and the game is over, even though they're playing from behind. You know, they could have just been playing push mid wave back, then go back to Drake, but Caps has to like stand there in the mid wave and get hooked through the Ivern brush. It's like, we don't have to play the game like this. We have a range advantage. But they never wanted to try and force TPs. They never wanted to force the fight at Baron or Drake, and they just got punished for it. Like, T1, T1 was just allowed to place vision traps. They were allowed to clear out bot wave without using TP. It's just not acceptable. Like, G2 played really scared in that third game, and I get it. It's an elimination game, right? But you have to have that killer instinct, and I think that's what G2 lacked.
By the way, there was actually an interview, I think it was actually Kang, I'm going to guess it would be, that Caps did, where everyone on Reddit was praising it, Monty, and loving it, because he basically just said the gist was sort of like that, unlike other Western players or teams, he's not afraid. Like, he actually thinks there's always hope to beat T1 and the Asian team. And I just wanted to tell him, like, yes, because you're Caps. Like, you are aware of that, right? The others don't have that confidence because they aren't you, bro. Like, you notice how after MSI ends, the other teams don't release their scrim schedules showing they're like consistently beating BLG because they're not doing any of that. What do you mean?
They beat Genji too in some of the scrims.
Oh, whatever. But the point is, like, if you actually saw, like, there's a totally logical reason why G2 was confident. Not only did they consistently have great scrims at every single level of League of Legends, then the games show they're way more capable. And then you have players like Caps who, this problem with someone like Caps is this is where you know his dad's done good a job raising him. He actually seems to be in some egalitarian gaslighting where he thinks everyone could be like him. It's like, bro, you are the once in a generational talent. Like, you are aware, Caps, you're the only one on your team that makes any of that stuff happen. Like, if you look at all the last lineups, like, either G2 is the greatest org in history or you're just the best player ever. Like, you know, there's that stat, Monty. He's only lost once in the LEC finals. That was that one time when Rogue just 3-0'd him and he was still pretty good even in that. Like, I don't think this guy understands. Like, I would love to get his own teammates, take him to my Thorin LFN black site, as it were, in this scenario. Fuck it. If the name sounds weird, mate, we're going to do that. We're on our Tom Clancy shit at the LFN black site, and then I'll put the truth serum in them. And all I'm going to tell you is this: the ones that aren't Caps, they'd also just break and be like, yeah, you know, actually, sometimes I do wonder, am I as good as fucking Zeus? Probably not really, if I'm being honest. You know, he has got a better chance. Oh, shit, what am I saying? Like, that's where, like, anyone who has Caps, it's like, that shouldn't even be fair to consider. It's why actually I have a hard time knowing how good the coaching staff of G2 is, for example. Because, like, I do think they're the best anyway, but they also then have Caps and the best players. So it's like, when you add it all together, it's just an insane advantage, isn't it?
It's also like they can be the best because they have more tools to work with, right?
Yeah, of course.
And, you know, they're willing to take risks, but the players are also willing to take risks. I mean, you see that in the G2 versus Top Esports series. Ivern has been a pick in Europe, guys. It hasn't been picked that much outside of LEC. And you could tell because Top Esports played hilariously badly against the Ivern. Like, I literally started my VOD review of these games asking, because I always have to ask when teams haven't played against Ivern in a while, particularly Asian teams, does this team know what Ivern does? Because oftentimes they don't, guys. Like, professional teams get very confused playing against Ivern and do things such as Jackie Love going into a Drake fight and then walking up into melee range as Varus versus Daisy and just getting hammered. I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, do you know what this champion does? They love walking into choke points versus Daisy and then getting like 3-man knockup. Like, it's hilarious. They don't respect the fact that there's 25 Medjai stacks, which increases Daisy's damage. And so Daisy just stands there punching them and they just lose the fight. It's really funny, guys. It's really funny. But if you haven't seen these champs before and you're not ready, like, part of the coaching staff is pulling this out. And part of it is, you know, G2. They came in with so many of these picks. And also, one of the great things about this tournament was Mickey X hadn't been performing domestically, but holy shit, he showed up to play this MSI. He looked fucking amazing. He was playing the support Poppy, which ended up having to be banned by a lot of teams. His Leona was great. He was basically the only person playing these champions. They brought back the COG Braum versus Top Esports that we should have seen earlier. Like, why were we running COG Calista or Renata when we could have been running COG Braum previously? So I loved a lot of what we saw from G2. Like, they were bringing in the Rek'Sai. Caps' Tristan mechanics looked absolutely amazing this tournament. You know, they were one of the first teams to start playing the Camille top, them and Oscarinen. It was actually the European teams that started the Camille trend. And yes, the pinnacle of the Camille trend was Bin's Camille, obviously, but he didn't start really the flow on the meta. And so I think G2, they were really quite clever in how they drafted, and they were really quite clever in how they played. And in many ways, I mean, we even saw interviews from teams like Gen G saying that other teams were doing unconventional picks, which inspired them to do it. And G2 has their own style and they stick to it. It's that the coaches know, and the coaches also try and find advantages that other teams don't find. Why is G2 the best level 1 team in the world? Why is that? Can nobody else do level 1s? It's weird, but they found a way to get advantages and they use it, right? They use it. And if oftentimes other coaching staffs, they just want to follow the meta. They don't want to try and find the angles. They don't want to trust their players to play some wacky ass picks, even if they're working. And they don't, if that player's pick is working or they have a strong pick, sometimes you have to build entire comps around those picks that are unorthodox, which means the other players have to bend their play style. So the other players have to be willing to do that, have to be bought into a system to do that. And G2, it just feels like the players are all bought into the G2 system. And do they cook too hard sometimes? Do they burn the food? Absolutely. You know, I was not a fan of some of the picks that they had in their drafts.
Yeah, but it's like we said last week, though, right? We need a bit of that. They've got to cook a bit. They can't just have the basic a la carte, right?
Yeah, and you just have to assume that occasionally they're going to lose because they overcook, and it's like that's fine. I'd rather take that than you know, just playing the meta and losing. You know, playing the meta and losing. They did. I think if you look at the teams this tournament, G2 was by far the meta leader of this event. You know, other teams were doing Yasuo top, right? This was something that, you know, other teams were inspired by. Like Zeus was playing Yasuo top. Like, you know, Bin was, even though Bin is historically a Camille player, he was picking up the Camille really heavily. Nobody else picked up the Poppy support, but Mickey X used to be, as I understand it, a one-trick Poppy support. So I don't think it's surprising. Like that could take another angle. And actually, you know, what's funny is that Keria did that in LCK domestically. He, in game 1 of the finals versus Gen G, he actually tried that Poppy support. So, you know, it's possible that Mickey looked at that and said, oh, Keria lost on it in that game 1. But it's possible that, you know, Mickey X looked at that and said, oh, we can actually use this, but do it right and do it better. And they did.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.